Hi, my name's Carol Ricard, and thank you so much for watching this episode. I'm really glad that you are here because the mission of the I Am Not Cancer show is to really inspire people with hope. And we do that by sharing survivor stories, including stage 4 cancer survivors. Then to inform, and we do that with interviews from practitioners from different disciplines that can, all provide services to people that are kind of going through active cancer treatment. And then it's to empower. And that's where my job is to really teach the skills that I've been teaching for the past 30 years in hospitals and to bring those. I am a stage 3 cancer survivor. And I have to tell you that I used everything I knew during my cancer journey in order to keep today's topic from really impacting me. Now, what we're going to talk about today is stress. All right. So, not only am I going to kind of share with you why it's so important to really take steps to manage stress, but also we're going to talk a little bit about what it is and then how do we deal with it? All right. And I'm also going to talk about ways that we would be better off not dealing with it. So, with that in mind, I want to just kind of jump right in because we got lots to talk about and really, just about 26 more minutes to talk about it. So, that takes me to really the first point, and that is why. Why is it so critical? Well, for everybody, but particularly cancer patients, to manage stress? Well, the research over the past couple years has really demonstrated, why we need to be doing more to manage stress. First, so it's three things that's been identified in research over the past 2 years. One is that stress, because of the way it kind of impacts our body and triggers our fight or flight response, can actually produce these neurochemicals that can actually speed up the growth of cancer. So stress can actually cause, our cancer to grow and to speed up that growth. The second way that research has identified why it's so critical is because stress also has been demonstrated to impact the efficacy of some treatment outcomes. And so, you might think, yeah, really, can stress be that powerful? But here's the thing, stress is really more powerful than any medication that we could take. And then, thirdly, which is more of the recent, which hasn't really kind of been presented before, was that there have been some studies that have kind of connected stress with a reoccurrence of cancer. So that even you might be through your cancer journey and you yourself might be a cancer survivor, it doesn't mean that you can stop really taking kind of control of stress because of this latest findings. So those are the three areas, the three reasons why it is so critical for us to do something. Let's move on to what is stress. So If I write this up on the board, and we were live in a workshop, all of you would probably tell me something different, right? When I used to do this with my patients in the hospital, I would get anything from migraines to bills to, headaches to anxiety to children to, money to family to um, tense muscles. Uh, Quite honestly, the best answer that I ever got, though, was life, right? And I love that because it really is so true. Because here's the thing, as long as we are on this earth alive, right? And this goes to sort of not just human beings, but really, any sort of mammal, our brains are wired for survival. Okay. They are 24 hours a day. It's kind of like we have this watchtower. All right. You know how they used to have the big castles and they would have this really big watchtower? Or, like in junkyards, if you've heard, they'll have like watchdogs, right? Well, we have one in our brain. And if you need to know what it's called the amygdala. All right. And that is our watch center. And what it does is it is monitoring for changes or situations in our environment that could be potentially dangerous. And here's the thing, really simply put, stress is a response to a change or situation. So I'm going to write this on the board. All right. Now, really important for you to understand is that the change can be either positive or negative. Stress doesn't come wrapped in all these good packages. Um, think about the person, who's getting married, right? Oh my God, it is like the most incredible kind of experience and positive life change. And yet, that big change that happens in their lives is also very stressful. Okay. And the other thing about this, so it can be positive or negative. And the other thing that's really important to know is that it could be a big change or a little change. So a little change might be you leaving a couple minutes late for work, or maybe the kids waking up a couple minutes late, right? The big change, though, in most of our lives dealing with cancer is that cancer diagnosis. But more globally, even think about something like the pandemic that has just continued to go on for 2 years. So it could be positive or negative, it could be big or little. All right. So that is what stress is. It's simply our physiological response to a change or a situation. All right. So we talked about 3 reasons it's important to kind of take control of stress, especially for cancer patients. We talked about what stress is. And now I kind of want to talk about why probably what you're doing isn't working. Okay. And that is that I discovered just about 20 years ago why stress management isn't enough. And I kind of out of desperation, I kind of discovered what works. And I'm going to share that with you here today. But one of the most important things I want to point out is that if you're like me, right, you've probably exercised, You try and eat healthy. You try and kind of get to sleep on time. Maybe you actually can go for a massage. Maybe you actually, spend time with your pets or going outside, or maybe you even do yoga or even mindfulness. But the fact of the matter is that that's not enough. When I worked in the hospital and I started this dream job 20 years ago, I ended up in my doctor's office 3 weeks in a row with migraines about 6 months into the job. And the third week, he said, Carol, what's got you so stressed out? Now, here's the confession. I was teaching my patients how to deal with stress, but I wasn't doing a very good job of it myself, or at least my doctor was kind of pointing that out. And my problem is that I did all those stress management things, but during my workday, I didn't have the time to go outside. If I ate, it was usually at my desk doing something. And so I vowed to try something, and that was to teach the tools I was teaching, but to use them for just 15 or 30 seconds at a time. Because here's the thing, hospitals are really stressful. You don't get to control what shows up, right? You don't get to control the situations or the changes that happen. And after 1 week of doing that, I actually had my first week with no migraine. And so it was sheer desperation. Now, the picture I love to use it for people is, imagine this. You turn on your tub at 10 o'clock in the morning and you leave the house and you go to work. And then you don't come home until 5:30 at night and turn it off. What do you think would happen? Right. It is going to completely make a mess. And that was the problem I was running into. My stress would just start to build up during the day, that I never got to do the things in the evening that were managing stress. And so that's how I discovered what I call rapid relief therapy. And you're going to walk away from today's show understanding exactly what that is. But first, I want to talk about what not to do with your stress. All right. And to do that, also, it means kind of sharing with you all. So, you are looking at one of my stress tools. All right. Now, have to confess, it wasn't Coors Light back then, because Coors Light didn't exist when I was 14 years old. But it was other beer, it was other alcohol. And the reason that I ended up turning to this was I discovered by accident that my father was dying from cancer. Now, I grew up in a family that we didn't talk about things, and so I never told anyone. Instead, I just started stealing a lot of alcohol. And you want to know the funny part? I hated the taste of it, but it did its job. It sort of kept me, from having to feel that overwhelm that I would have felt, without it, quite honestly. Now, I was really lucky because basketball rolled around and I ended up stopping the drinking and I ended up picking up a basketball, and that was what I call my life tool. And this is what I call my survival tool. And the truth is, for a lot of people, they grab at tools as kids just to really survive the moment. For Oprah, it was one more like this. It was food, right? And kind of like more food. And so those might be your survival tools, and those might be the tools you're using right now. But unfortunately, those are the tools that aren't going to work. All right. Because all they're doing is sort of covering up, all right, what's built up inside. Just like the alcohol for me, it never really did anything with the stress and the overwhelm and the anxiety, but it just sort of covered it up temporarily. And the way I like to say is, have you ever taken one of these, which is just a regular old knife, right? And used it as one of these, which is a regular old screwdriver. Well, we grab at this because it's a quick fix, but you got to eventually come back because the chair's going to get loose again. And you really could get hurt because you could go to sit in it one day and it could fall to the ground and you might break your arm. So, what we don't want to do is use these temporary kind of like solutions because that's what they are. They're quick fixes, right? And there's food and there's substances, whether that's, medication my doctor's prescribing me, and maybe I take a little bit more of it, or maybe it's drinking, and quite honestly, nowadays, people will tend to use marijuana in a lot of places because it's legal. Now, that's nothing against the marijuana, but I'm just saying is that does nothing to take care of the stress that's kind of built up on the inside, right? And so that's why it becomes really, really important to pay attention to what are you not doing. So that's what to not do. Well, but what are we to do, right? Well, as I like to say, it's kind of you got to tune in, right? I call it the M&M approach because what we end up having to do is we want to, kind of minimize and manage. But in order to do that, we have to be able to kind of recognize where we're at. So, one of the things and one of the ways I like to get people to think about this is that, a little bit of stress in our life is actually good. Research has shown that it can make us more productive. It can kind of give us some more energy. There's really good things to come from a little bit of stress. Imagine a guitar. If it didn't have a little stress on the strings, guess what? It wouldn't be able to play amazing music, or a piano or a violin, right? So that little bit of stress is really kind of healthy and we want that. But what we don't want is too much stress because just as on the musical instrument, too much stress will cause it to break, right? And same thing in us. And I want to show you though, because what I've used to kind of make stress visible is think about this bottle of root beer. If you've ever drank a flat bottle of root beer, you know that it tastes horrible. So a little bit of pressure in the bottle is wonderful. It actually is a good thing. But what happens when there's too much pressure inside, right? Now, when I would do this at workshops, I kind of ask if anybody wants to open this, and usually people say no, no, no. And the reason is because they're afraid that it's going to just sort of explode. Well, what I want you to understand is that stress happens, right? These responses happen, and we may not even kind of recognize it, but we have to begin to. And what happens is as we go through our days, that level just starts to build and build and build. So pressure is slowly building inside of us until the point where in humans it either explodes, meaning that it comes usually out of people's mouths and they say things and they can become very angry and threatening and really kind of say things that they can't take back anymore, right? Or you're like me and it isn't an explosion, but it's an implosion, meaning that it just stays in and it makes me sick. And this is one of the dangers around cancer because we do not need that any of that stress to just be building up. What we really want to do is keep it down, really as low as we can. And what I like to say is if you use a scale of 1 to 10, right? In fact, when I would go for my cancer treatments, every office visit was, asked me my stress level from it was 1, which was really low and not at all, to 10, which was feeling completely overwhelmed and paralyzed. Um, do a check with yourself. Always check in with yourself. what would I put myself? Scale of 1 to 10. Where would I put myself right now? Okay. And what you might find is there's times during the day where it might be a little lower, and there's times where it's a little higher. You might find situations where it is a little lower, and then situations where it's a little bit higher. And the secret to it comes back to this bottle, right? And that is this: we want to stop the pressure from building up, and we want to release it. And so the fastest way to sort of monitor our levels, right, are to just kind of on a quick 1 to 10 check in with yourself. Check in with yourself every hour or every half hour. Because while I was at the hospital, this is what I started to do. As I was going through my day, and depending upon what happened, because if there was really things that happened, I'd say, okay, Carol, 1 to 10. That's all I just say to myself is 1 to 10. Where are you? And if I was at a 5 or higher, what I would do is do what I'm about to actually share with you that I do. Okay. So here's the thing. The other thing we can do is, kind of the foam on the bottle tells you to be careful. Well, you might notice things about you that begin to tell you to be careful. And that's why I discovered the scale, though, right, is to rate it. That is the quickest way, easiest way to check in with ourselves, because sometimes you can just get so busy that you don't even have time to sort of kind of be connected to what you're doing. All right. So, does that make sense? We need stress, to be managed. And that means is that our goal is to aim for lower than a 5. If we can aim for lower than a 5, all right, then we're going to put ourselves in a very healthier place, when it comes to really our health and quite honestly, anything else in our lives. So let's go on to what do we do? So I'm going to flip this. So remember I told you, it brings us to, I call this rapid relief therapy. And, or for short, RRT, right? And here is simply what I started doing. I'd always taught my patients to do something calming for them, right? And for different people, that's different things. But what I discovered is that we have to kind of like the tub, right? We actually have to stop the flow or the buildup. So then what we got to do though is release so we have room for more when it starts to kind of build back up again, if that makes sense. So rapid relief therapy is really doing something in the instant you say to yourself, it's a 5 or higher, and having things you can do. So first step number 1 is stop. And that means to stop the flow from building up. So we want to stop it from building up. The second thing we want to do is actually we want to make room. Because here's the thing I can promise you is that as you kind of go through the next 24 hours, or let's even say 8 hours, depending upon what you're doing, you might get that level down. And then guess what happens? Another change or situation happens that just turns on that flow all over again. And that's really how our brain is designed to really protect us. Because when it turns on that flow, it's actually turning on a part of our nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. And basically, what that does is it just really gets our whole body ready, for fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. And what we got to do is first, we got to shut it off. Think of the tub, right? So we see this tub running. First thing we got to do is shut the water off. The flow has to stop. But then the second thing we got to do is pull the drain and release some, because if it gets turned back on, we actually have some room to kind of absorb it, if that makes sense. All right. Now, the secret that I discovered, all right, and this is you must do step 1, always followed by step 2. And here's the thing, it has to be something calming. All right. And then for step 2, what I've really learned is the second step has to be, I wanted to write active. So, yeah. That means that it has to be active, right? That we have to do something that requires muscles. So, for instance, in my office, I actually put a heavy bag. Now, I don't have a heavy bag in my new office. And what I do have is my handy dandy hammer. But that's why exercise is so critical for cancer patients. Even though you're tired, we need to just get ourselves moving, because what ends up happening is that when we move, we actually begin to drain, right, some of the flow that's built up. And if you think about the bottle, it's when we go just to let a little bit out. The other secret here is that we have to do, right? You don't have to do a long time. What I started doing was, I aimed for 60 seconds a step. Sometimes, guess what I only had? Sometimes I only had 15 seconds. But the point being is that we actually have to do these 2 steps anytime we catch ourselves at a 5 or higher. All right. I hate to say it, but we've actually run out of time. It goes by so quickly. So here's what we've talked about on today's show. 1, I shared the 3 reasons why we need to do something about our stress as cancer patients, right? Then we talked a little bit about what stress is, and that we're not going to get away from it because our brain is wired for survival. 24 hours a day, the watch center is on. We talked about what not to do, right? And that is to use food and alcohol, or even just avoidance and denial, because again, that flow stays here, doesn't go anywhere. And lastly, we talked about what to do, and that is using rapid relief therapy, or RRT, to reduce it instantly, right? Instantly. You could do it anytime, anywhere. Nobody has to know where you are, by doing these 2 steps. Stop and then release. So here's what I want to do. Invite you to come back to the next episode, because we're going to dive even deeper, right, into this process. And I want to teach you even more specifically and have you do some things specifically that are going to help you take that level from an 8 or a 9 or a 10 or even a 5, get it below that danger zone. All right. So thanks again for watching. I'm Carol Ricard, and I'll see you on the next episode.